I had seen him across the supermarket aisle that Wednesday when I was out doing shopping. His hair rested in his temple, bouncing with every step. He clearly didn't overly oil it, and I liked him for that. It was just cut recently, I noticed. He had a sharp jaw and his skin was lightly tanned. He was one of those people whose clothes fit them perfectly. Obviously, he was new in town. Everybody knew everybody here, and he stood out. It was winter, too, so the fading tan must have come out of a machine. Aplenty in the city, and not our little town. I was drawn to him, and while I did my shopping, I subconsciously watched him. We met at the counter, and he smiled at me. The casual smile of a stranger. Not too interested, not backing off either. Good-natured. I returned a smile of my own in equal measure, then quietly took stock of how I looked. Even though I came out for a quick store run, I was thoroughly covered for the weather, and so only my face was out there. I wasn't terrible to look at, and since he looked, I got bolder. As the cashier was scanning my liquor, chocolate, and ready-to-microwave turkey, I turned to him and turned on the charm. "Hey there, stranger," I began. "New here?" He laughed a little laugh and replied, "That obvious, huh?" I nodded, so he continued. New is what I am." There was a short silence as the scanner was beeping over my items. I pointed to his basket. "January shopping?" "You could call it that, but I'm really just stocking up on supplies for the house." I wanted to ask where he lived, but it was too soon. I'd find out later. "Nice. You'll be with us long?" I pried. He smiled disarmingly, paused up his Ken shopping to be scanned. "I think I will. Till most of next year, maybe. We'll see." I muttered, "We sure will," under my breath, and watched my stuff get packed and handed to me. I grabbed the bags and stretched my free hand out to him. "I'm Christy, by the way." His eyes twinkled and he firmly grabbed my hand. A jolt of something that felt like electricity quickly passed from my fingers through me. Nothing romantic because I could usually tell. "I'm Grant. Nice to meet you." "Pleasure's mine," I said. He had no idea. I left the store. Outside, I was struggling to put my shopping bags in the trunk of my car. There was a tinkling as the store door opened and shut, and he popped the trunk of the car right next to mine. It was an old Ford, but I couldn't resist. "Sweet ride," I said, suppressing laughter. He got the joke and laughed. "You know, it's a rental, but yeah, I chose it in particular for its sweetness." We both burst out laughing, and he shut his trunk, hesitating a bit before he spoke. "Say, Christy, do you think we could get dinner together later this week?" That was quick, I thought. I pretended to consider it and answered, "Sure, why not?" He breathed a sigh of relief and asked if the weekend was fine. I agreed and gave him my number. "I'll call you," he said before driving away. I smiled at myself all the way home. Maybe the first month of 2022 wouldn't be so lonely after all. The week decided to be agonizingly slow, but it eventually gave way for the weekend. And on Saturday morning, Grant called me and we had a friendly chat. He asked if we were still on for that evening, and I casually answered that I was. He was just as funny as the day at the store, and the conversation ended amiably, and I looked forward to a nice evening. I cleaned around the house, buzzed from the call. I had advised him on what restaurants were available as he was new in town. The options were painfully few, but he made a good choice. A quiet mom and pop setup at the edge of town. They served steak as well as burgers and fries. There was wine, too, although I hadn't ordered one the time I came around here. Grant picked the bottle, which was red, since they only had red, but it was good. We put in our order, and the old ancient rituals began. "So, how long have you been in this beautiful town, Christy?" Grant ventured. "Well, all my life, I'm afraid, except for the time I went off to college." "And where was that?" "Austin, Texas." "Nice." He digested that with a sip of his wine, and it was my turn. "How about you? Where'd you go to school?" "England, actually," he said with a serious face. "Wow, but you have no accent." He laughed at that. "I didn't acquire one. Did not see the need." "So what brings you to our little town?" At that moment, our steak arrived, and there was a pause in the conversation. We began eating, and he raised his head to look at me. "I came here for rest and peace." I nodded. Our town was serene enough for someone to find those things here. Plausible. Little conversation was made while we dined. And when the time came to order a dessert, we chose the same mint ice cream. He finished first and asked that we go to the park. You know the park? I asked. Yeah, I drive past it sometime. That was curious because one simply did not drive past the park. It was out of sight of the main roads. I brushed it away, and when we left the restaurant, it was dark outside. I followed his car to the road entering the park, and we left the cars there. I was still surprised he knew the way. It was empty as it was a cold night, but we were both well covered. We sat on a bench and began to talk. Soon enough, we had come closer to each other on the bench, drawn by warmth and other more amorous intentions. He turned to kiss me, but when he put his hand on my neck to steady my face, I felt woozy, the kind of feeling you get when you drink something that's been drugged. I shrugged his hand off and felt fine again. He appeared surprised and came in again for another try. The feeling returned again, and I knocked his hand away this time. He was smiling, that smile. And then he forced both hands on me, and even though I struggled, the woozy feeling came faster. When I was sufficiently dazed but still awake, he used one hand to begin stripping my coat off. I screamed, but it came out as a murmur, too dazed. My coat had come off at this point, and he kept going, reaching to take my shirt off. I fell. His rush to take my clothes off had pushed me to the edge of the bench, and one nudge took me downward. As soon as I landed on the cold snow, my senses rushed to me. I took off running. The cold air lashed on my face and bit me. Trees flashed past in the darkness. Luckily, my gloves were still on, so my fingers weren't getting numb. I kept running, but the snow wasn't that easy to plow through. I tripped twice and looked behind both times. I didn't see him anywhere. I also did not know if I was getting closer or farther away from my car. Then I saw the blue and red lights of a cop car. I started to scream and cry for help, but a louder scream shot out from behind me. My left eardrum burst and began to bleed. The cop car didn't stop. It seemed like I was the only one unfortunate enough to hear the scream. Running was harder now, but I knew he was definitely behind me, so I kept going.
Wait!
He called out. I heard his voice was different, but I knew it. It was deep and grisly. And when I stumbled out into a clearing in the park, he landed there too. Dropped, more like it. He was on all fours, crouching like he was ready to leap at me. My breath caught and my thoughts ran. I thought I had orchestrated our meeting, but it turned out I was just a pawn, a victim. I was weak, so all I could do was shut my eyes, raise my arm over my face, and scream. I heard something solid connect with a body. I thought I was hearing what was happening to me, but when I opened my eyes, the scene was different. Grant lay on the ground, whimpering silently. An axe handle stuck out from his back. An old man in ragged clothes stood nearby and wiped his brow.
Sorry for the fright, sweetie. They just keep coming back. But I've got this one good.
Too scared to subscribe?
I was sure I picked the perfect dress for that night when I looked at myself in the mirror, and the brightest smile I had had in a while crept up to my face. The red gown hugged my body perfectly. I looked at my face in the mirror again and left the house. I met Kelvin about 2 months ago, and so far I couldn't say if it was just the new person trait or if we really connected on so many different levels. He was an amazing person also. Patient, kind, and always ready to listen. This was our second date. We both decided to take things slow because we had both recently left an abusive relationship. Taking things slow was relatively the next option for us. The restaurant was lively and full. It was a Saturday night. Everyone was probably out to have fun. Men and women were all mushy to each other, and as much as I knew that was a good part of a relationship, it was not my thing. I looked around to see Kelvin at the far end of the restaurant. I laughed at how much he was dressed also. He went all out. It was sweet that a guy could actually dress up that much for a date. It could mean something. He saw me and stood up as I approached. He gave me a peck on the cheek and told me I was beautiful. I smiled bashfully at him. The restaurant didn't have chairs where we had to sit opposite of each other. They probably thought it helped couples connect better, and truly, it did the trick. Few minutes passed after they had brought our food. We brought up conversations in the process of eating. Kelvin was surprisingly an interesting person. There was just something new about him that amazed me every time he brought them up. I was about to put another one of the fries in my mouth when I noticed something moving between my thighs. At first, I thought it was just air because of the slit that was on the dress and ignored it, but it felt different the second time. And when I looked down, a pair of fingers were rubbing against my thighs. I looked up to see a pair of eyes that were full of lust. "What are you doing? We're in public. This is very wrong. You know that," I told him. "Natasha, just hold on, okay? We can do this anywhere," he said. I looked at him again to be sure I was with the right person. I had never seen that part of him before. If only he knew that it was one of the reasons I wanted to actually take things slow. I had a very high sexual urge. I was beginning to think he had the same thing as well with the way he was going. "Kelvin," I said in almost a whisper, even though I was enjoying what he was doing to me. I bit the bottom of my lips and I tried not to make any sound so that no one would know what was happening. "Kelvin, stop," I said quietly again. "No, don't stop. Continue," I thought to myself. A mischievous smile crept to his face like he was enjoying the kind of status he was putting me through. He stopped suddenly and sat up in the chair before looking at me. I couldn't stare back at him. My cheeks were all red. I was blushing so hard and was embarrassed at what just happened. "Let's go back to my place to continue what we started," Kelvin said, which I just nodded in response to. He winked at me before calling the waiter for the bill. When we got to his place, I was shocked as to how big and beautiful his place was. I had never been to a guy's house that was that organized. Everything was in place and exactly how they should be. The lights were also a good complement with the color that the house was painted with. The house also smelled like vanilla, just like him. It was perfect. If this was not the perfect place to get intimate with someone, I didn't know what else could be called perfection. He pulled me closer to himself, and his lips found their way to my lips. Kissing him was like a dream. I didn't want it to stop. I pressed my lips harder against his. His lips were too soft for me to reject them, and when he tried to pull away, I pulled him back to myself, hugging him tightly that told him that I wanted more of it. "I thought we were taking it slow," he asked. "This could be our definition of slow." I smiled sheepishly at him. He pulled me with him as he led me to another part of his house. The more we walked, the more I realized he probably had a thing for a perfect home. It was just too beautiful to ignore. He opened the door to what I guessed was his room, and before I could ask any questions, he pushed me to the bed. "Rough, I like it," I said to him. He only smiled at me and didn't utter a word. He pulled off his clothes, leaving only his boxers on, and he lay beside me. I stared at the perfect body that was beside me. He just stood there in all his perfectness and beauty. "Like what you see?" he asked. He must have noticed that I was staring at him. Who wouldn't stare at that body? It was perfect. He pulled me closer to himself after I pulled off my dress also. I saw him looking at me like a predator that was ready to devour its prey. "You're beautiful," he said. There was a knock on the door, and Kelvin and I frowned at each other before rushing to dress up. Kelvin opened the door and got shoved aside by someone I knew all too well. Matthew, my ex-boyfriend. Only God knew how Matthew found me. He was always overprotective in the relationship and didn't give me the freedom of going out with people. "Matthew, like I said, it's over between us. Get out of here." He looked at me sternly before replying, "I'll never let you go that easy." He dropped the bag he was holding and ran out of the house. I was scared, so when I went to check what was in the bag, I saw a small device that looked like a clock, and it had a timer on its face, and it was counting down. My face blanched. I yelled at Kelvin to get out of the house, and I grabbed my clothes and rushed out, hoping Kelvin was right behind me. Just as I got to the street, an explosion rocked the house and I got knocked flat on my face. I covered my head with my hands. Kelvin pulled me up and we both turned to stare at the ruins of his house. As much as I liked Kelvin, I knew being with him was risky to him. I couldn't be safe till Matthew was locked behind bars. I let Kelvin hug me, and as he swore to me that he would keep me safe, tears fell from my face because I knew I had to leave him.